McSherry from Douglas Elliman, and this is REDinNYC Live. I have today with us Fred Leffel, the managing partner of Flatiron Equities. We're going to talk about business strategies during the pandemic and plans for the future. So first, we would like to thank our sponsors, CNA Seneca Construction, Champion Elevator, Skyline Scaffolding, City Bay Capital, Clean to Clean, Remax 100, Eco Safety, View, Property Shark, and Hydrotech Environmental. So thank you to all our sponsors, and thank you, Fred, for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about your history as a managing partner, as a developer, and everything you've done up until today?
Yeah, well, I guess my background is I was a lawyer, started out as a lawyer, worked at a couple of large New York law firms, and then I spent about 12 years between two different firms on Wall Street in real estate investment banking. After that, I worked for a while at one of the investment sales firms for a while, and about 10 or 11 years ago now, 12 years ago, I went with one of my clients, George Kaufman, and formed a business with him called Kaufman New Ventures. And our business was acquiring and repositioning older office buildings in New York City. And that was 2009, 2010. We were coming out of the Great Recession. The Kaufman organization was one of the oldest New York real estate companies, family-owned companies. They had millions of square feet of space and had a very interesting history in that they had never defaulted on a loan or given back a property, going through many, many cycles, including the Great Depression. And we thought that since they were a fully integrated company and had all this operating expertise of all these buildings that they owned, that we would be a good platform to attract capital, lenders, and equity capital to take advantage of some of the buying opportunities and reposition office buildings in New York City, because we believed in the resiliency of the New York City office market. And now I have my own company doing something similar.
Okay, very good, exciting stuff. Well, thank you again, and thank you for telling everyone about your background. And why don't we start off by just talking real quick about REDinNYC and how we're grateful for this platform during the pandemic, that we could actually network and kind of keep in touch with each other virtually. So, what are your thoughts on networking and everything, since we can't have our REDinNYC events right now in person?
Right. Well, I think it's a very valuable platform to have during this period. Obviously, there are plenty of people who are working on stuff, but if you're in the deal business, in the new deal business, there isn't a lot that's happening. There's some activity, but it's important to maintain your relationships, build new relationships. And also keep up with what people are thinking. I mean, one of the things that is going on now is that a lot of people are giving a lot of thought to what to do going forward and how we come out of this from real estate perspective. And I think platforms like Red offer a good opportunity to get together, to hear what's being said, and to network when you can't get out and network at these cocktail parties and things like that. But this is a good way to keep in touch and maintain and build on new relationships. So it is very valuable. Yes,
I agree, and I'm so grateful for Red. I used to really enjoy the events, and now I'm networking with other real estate investors and developers through the social media platforms that Red provides. So I'm really grateful for that. So why don't we talk about your thoughts on what the impact of the office market will be with, now so many people are working from home. Where do you think that's going to go as people are allowed to start going back to work?
Right. Well, let me start out by saying that I've been through a lot of cycles in my career. I started out, people don't remember this, in the 70s when the New York City fiscal crisis. New York City was about to file bankruptcy. Things were pretty grim then. Another event that people don't remember was that in the late 1970s, every single mortgage REIT in the country failed and went out of business. Mortgage REITs weren't a big factor in the market, but all of them that did exist went out of business. And then there was an explosive growth in real estate values as a result of partnership syndication business, relying a lot on the tax benefits of investing in real estate. And then in 1984, Congress passed the Tax Reform Act, and real estate values collapsed all over the country, and there was a great recession in real estate. And that led to the savings and loan crisis, which was a national crisis. Then now that I think about it, in 1990, there was a famous quote from Sam Zell, attributed to Sam Zell, and they asked him, well, what's the strategy for real estate going forward? This was 1991. And he said, stay alive till 95. Just stay in business. Stay out of foreclosure. That was a major concern of folks. That's how bad things were. And then we had the dot-com collapse, and then 9/11, and then the Great Recession. The important thing was New York City came out of all of those things. And, when each of those things hit, people thought it was the end of the world. 9/11, you may remember, people thought, who would ever want to be in a high-rise office building, let alone somebody who might pay a lot of money to be in a co-op or condominium at the top of a New York City or high-rise building? And yet, in a few years, things came back and we adjusted.
Right.
So I think that's what's going to happen now. But one of the interesting things that's happened over the past few months is we've had this forced experiment in work from home. And one of the things that you hear and read about in the general press and even in the real estate press is, well, what is the impact going to be on office occupancy? People are going to want to work from home. And there have been some quotes from some major business leaders and CEOs of large corporations about the impact of this on their space needs. I take a little different view. No question that a lot of people have gotten used to, and many may even enjoy working from home. And there's a certain segment or a certain subset of the population of the workforce will want to work from home. For some, the novelty will wear off after a while if it hasn't already, but some will like it. Some will say, hey, I can be very efficient from home. But you have to look at it from the point of view of the employer and the employee. So some employees may like it, but the employer may say, oh, yes, we've been very efficient working this way, but others may say, wait a minute, we haven't been very efficient working this way. So even though you like to work from home, I don't want you to work from home. I want you to come in. And many of the employees who say, I like working from home, say, oh, yeah, I'd like to work from home 2 or 3 days a week. Well, what does that mean for office occupancy? If they go into the office 2 or 3 or 4 days a week, there has to be some space for them.
Right.
So, and there's a collegiality, there's collaboration, there's mentoring, there's a social factor to working in an office that I think a lot of people gravitate to and want, particularly if you're looking to advance yourself in your company, right? If you're out of sight, to a certain extent, you're out of mind. You're not in front of your bosses and the people who are going to see your work. And in some cases, it is not efficient to work from home for certain tasks. But if you step back from that, you say, okay, sure, there's going to be some percentage of workers who are going to want to work from home, and whose employers are going to say, yeah, I would like those people to work from home because they are efficient and I save the costs of, having office space for them and so forth. Well, what's the overall impact of that? Let's think about it. At the same time, when you're thinking about that, you have to realize there's this, over the past 15 years, there's been this tremendous move in offices to densify office space. The amount of space per worker has gone down drastically. 10 years, there are lots of different studies, and it depends on which study you look at. And you know, you can debate whether the studies were accurate or not, but they all point in sort of a similar direction. About 10 years ago, the average nationally, the average space per employee, office space per employee, is about 225 square feet per employee. If you were planning your office, it was somewhere around 225 square feet per employee, maybe even 250 square feet. Today, it's typical to plan an office space at about 150 square feet per employee. That's the densification. And in some of the large modern buildings that are being built, say for in Hudson Square, they've gotten that down to even 100 or under 100 square feet per employee. So just do simple math. This is a gross oversimplification. You have a company that has 100 employees, and in February, January or February, you say, okay, I want new space. I'm thinking about new space for that. 150 square feet per employee. I need a space of about 15,000 square feet. That's my space need for my company. Okay, but now we say, well, I'm going to lose, say, 25% of my employees, which I think is not that I'm losing them, but they're going to work from home. They're not coming into the office, which I think is probably excessive. But for the purposes of argument, I have 75 employees. Oh, okay. But the amount of space I need per employee, because of the new requirements of de-densifying that space for health reasons and other reasons, is about 225 square feet per employee. If you do the math, for the 75 employees, I now need close to 17,000 square feet, whereas I had 15,000 square feet before. Right. So I don't know whether it's going to be more or less, but I doubt that when everything settles out, we are going to have a drastic decrease in the amount of office space that companies need and want.
Sure, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and we're going to see a shift. And I'm just thinking back to some retail or some office space that I was in a couple years back, and I remember them really combining, like getting rid of cubicles for, specifically like in the fashion industry, they were getting rid of cubicles and making like communal areas where it's just one long table and multiple employees. So I'd be really, curious to see what happens to spaces like that. They're going to definitely have to expand because the social
nobody wants to sit like that anymore.
Right, exactly.
And even the places where they are going to have cubicles or benching, like you talked about, they're going to have to put up plexiglass barriers.
Right, yeah.
And there's going to be a 6-foot separation between you and the next person sitting there. Well, think about that in terms of the amount of space per employee.
Yeah.
And by the way, my example, the 25% of people who are not coming into the office, that doesn't mean they're never coming into the office. That may include some people who are coming in once a month or twice a month, so you have to have some place for them to sit. Or it may include some senior manager or somebody who wants to work at home 1 day a week or 2 days a week. Well, when he comes into the office 3 or 4 days a week, he needs an office. So,
exactly.
All of this is being worked out, and there are lots of smart people in terms of space planners and architects and engineers psychologists sort of figuring this out. But I think when it all shakes out, there will not be a dramatic decrease in the space needs of companies.
Right. Well, really interesting perspective, and thank you for sharing that. So let's jump to, are there any particular types of assets that you're looking at, and how would you generally value those assets?
Right. So let me take it in reverse order, valuing assets.
Sure.
There's no question that the value for a lot of reasons of assets today and in the near future is going to be less than it was pre-COVID and pre-lockdown. There's no question about that. But at least for me, based upon my experience and going through lots of cycles, to think that you're going to be able, or that you should wait for absolute distress when you're going to be have an opportunity to buy stuff at pennies on the dollar, so to speak, That's fanciful thinking. For one thing, there's just too much money floating around in the capital markets waiting to pounce. So that opportunity will last, if it ever does come, for about a nanosecond. But what I do believe is, because I believe in the resiliency of the New York City market and that it will come back, whether it's a year, 2 years, or 5 years from now. There's an opportunity, there may be an opportunity to acquire properties at a modest discount, whether that's 10, 20, 25%, probably not more than that, probably less than that. But if it's a well-located property and it's structurally, the bones are good, if you can acquire that property a little bit better than you could before, because you couldn't before because it was too expensive, and if you're capitalized, well capitalized to take you through the next period of time, which is probably 2 to 3 years before everything sorts itself out, you should be in a pretty good position. You should be in a pretty good position. So assets that are well located and structurally sound, good assets and have good bones, I would say there's a modest discount, and I wouldn't try and wait for something, for the bottom to fall out, because I think it ain't going to happen. If an asset is located in a sort of the fringes, it's an asset too far from the path of development, those assets are going to take longer to come back. And I would only look to acquire those if there was a real discount. But I'm not interested in those assets. I'm interested in the assets that are well located and can be repositioned. In terms of the types of assets, I believe in the resiliency of the New York City office market, as I've discussed. So, classic office properties or properties. We did a lot of Kaufman. We did a lot of buildings that weren't quality office buildings, or they were even warehouses, and we converted them to office buildings. Yeah, that's still an opportunity. One of the interesting areas today, growth areas, where you could get capital and you get financing and you can get even development financing very readily today, is anything connected to the life sciences or health industry. And those are very, very interesting, because a lot of older New York properties are suitable to redevelop for those kinds of uses. Zoning is sometimes an issue, but those are very interesting. So we're looking at a couple of those opportunities as well. I think you were going to ask a question about the retail component, some of those buildings, how you value them, because that's the one chink in the armor here, where well, I'm very bullish on long-term New York City real estate, the office properties and the office life being very resilient and robust, and office buildings being a beehive of activity as they have been in the past at some point in the not too distant future. Retail, I think, is going through more of a tectonic and fundamental change. And for a whole variety of reasons, and the internet just being one of them, I think that to the extent that the value of a building is based in part on the income that can be generated from the retail has to be much, much more handicapped, because retail rents have fallen and a lot of that space has to be repositioned. And we can talk about that more, but that's something where I think you have to be very, very conservative in your underwriting.
Right. Yeah, and that was actually my next question. It leads me into, and it's something that I've noticed in and out of New York City. Retail is definitely changing. We've seen it in New York City prior to the pandemic. It's been crazy. I've seen so many vacancies. So where do you see it going, and where do you see opportunities? How can something happen?
Retail is the real head scratcher. And retail, as you said, there were large categories of retail that were in trouble long before COVID hit, and they were in trouble for a variety of reasons. The main one is the advent of internet retailing. There were companies that were going out of business and filing bankruptcy before that, or were whimpering along. some large business, some large categories of businesses. And the sort of the forced experiment that we have now in exclusive online retailing because of the lockdown and the shut-in has only exacerbated those problems. And you've seen a number of additional bankruptcies at JCPenney and J. Crew, and I'm sure there'll be others. So the COVID has only exacerbated those problems, but there are others, as well. There are all the mom and pop retailers, which create such of the street level vitality of New York. It's if you walk down the streets of New York, wherever you are, I mean, yeah, there are big chains and so forth, but most of the stores are small little stores that are owned by, a guy, his wife, a woman, whatever, and they may own that store, and that may be their life savings are involved in that store, or they own a few little stores. They didn't have a lot of savings. They're not well capitalized. They have had no income coming in for months. Even this reopening, this phase 2 reopening is not going to help them out that much. Yes, the government has helped somewhat, but I just fear that a lot of those people are going to be wiped out, and those stores, too many of them won't reopen. At the same time, there are people who will shop in those stores because people live in New York, and they do shop, right. And they go to the neighborhood hardware store, and they go to the beauty salon, and they go to the hardware store, I'm thinking about getting my new soles on my shoes. I go to the shoe repair guy. I don't know if he'll be able to open up, but if somebody else, there's demand, there are customers who can go to those stores if somebody else would open up. So even if those people, unfortunately, can't survive, there's sort of a new generation, a new wave of people that could come into those stores if the landlords are serious about setting the rent levels at levels that those businesses can afford, and not assume that the space that was formerly occupied by the shoe repair guy is automatically going to be able to charge 20 times what he was paying in rent because they think they're going to get some luxury jewelry retailer in there. Mm-hmm. Not happening.
Right. So do you think we may see any foreclosures within the smaller buildings, maybe 10 floors and under?
Yeah, so that could be. If you think about it, there a lot of the buildings in places like Soho and in the Village, mm-hmm. they're small buildings, not even 10 stories, they're 4 and 5 stories. And the ground floor is retail, and there may be a couple apartments above them, or there's some small office space above them. But they have been valued on the basis of exorbitant rental rates for the retail tenant. If you looked at the cash flow of the building or the income from the building, it's overwhelmingly based upon the retail space. And if those people have borrowed against those buildings, mm-hmm. and the retailers go out of business, or they can only pay some small portion of the rent, I think those buildings are going to have some problems. Unless the owners have owned the building forever, right, and have a very low basis and haven't borrowed heavily against them, then they can withstand it, just lower the rents and they'll be okay. But I fear that a lot of them will. Larger buildings, I don't think, have that problem to that extent because the retail didn't make up a huge percentage of the overall income. So if the retail shrinks quite a bit, they still should be able to cover, assuming they still maintain the office occupancy, they should be able to maintain their nut and pay the operating expenses and the mortgage and the real estate taxes. But all the buildings are under stress. And that the assumption there was that the office tenants are going to pay their rent. And that's another question.
Right, exactly. So, well, thank you for sharing all of that. I want to move to what needs to happen for us to get back to normal, or the new normal.
Yeah. So That's the big question everybody's struggling with, and I have a view on that. I think in terms of, we have to get from where we are today to a new reestablished normalcy. And I do think that new reestablished normalcy is a very vibrant normalcy where people are occupying buildings and there's commercial beehive activity and people paying rents in New York City as a cultural mecca and people want to be here and all that sort of stuff. I believe that. Mm-hmm. But how do we get from here to there? Well, I think we're going to enter into phase 2 next week or the week after or something like that. But it's very meaningful, but it's just a start. It's just starting to get some people back into the office buildings. So it's going to take some months before people get acclimated to that. And then there'll be a lot of protocols we're going to talk about, and people get used to that. And they're going to be occupying buildings and working in buildings on some sort of very constricted basis. And then the final phase, which is what I want to get to, is the new reestablished normal. And that may be 2 years, maybe 3 years, maybe 5 years from now. My guess is probably somewhere between 2 to 3 years. So how do we get from here to there? I think there are 5 steps. I mean, I see 5 steps to getting to a total reestablished normalcy. Number 1 is, for lack of a better term, flattening the curve. And that just means that the incidence of infection becomes a lot lower than we feared it was 2 months ago. People have to feel comfortable going out, going to work, and so forth. And for a while, people were just very nervous that if we go outside, I'm going to get sick. Well, the likelihood of getting sick was actually not quite so great, but it was significant. And we've made a lot of progress in flattening the curve and lowering that. Number 2 is people have to develop confidence in the protocols and standards for getting into and getting out of buildings and occupying the buildings. And there's a lot of work being done on that by architects, by engineers, by scientists, by landlords. I know RXR has a very robust program. Cushman Wakefield has thought a lot about this. And involves both protocols for getting in and out of the buildings, getting up and down the elevators, and then within the space, how the tenants use the space and occupy the space. It also has to do with air filtration systems and so forth. The engineering aspects of this are actually not that complicated. Well, they may be complicated, but we're solving those issues. I spoke to an MEP engineer not so long ago, and he was talking about all the different techniques and different systems for air filtration and purifying air, and the MERV systems and the UV filtration systems for purifying air and stuff. And his overall comment was, he said, from an engineering perspective, don't worry about it. We got this. Okay, there are lots of different systems. They're not all perfected. We're going to have some touch and go, and some of them work, but don't worry about it. We'll solve all of this. So I think the buildings are going to become healthier and safer, the so-called well building or healthy building. So people are going to have to feel comfortable that going into the office is not a risk. I'm not exposed. I'm not increasing my risk of exposure to disease if I go into the office. Third thing is public transportation, enormously important in the city of New York. That's what we thrive on. The whole economy of New York depends on the public transportation. So people have to have confidence and a comfort level that the subways, the buses, the commuter trains are safe, they're clean, and I'm not risking exposure by going into them. And there again, I think we've actually made a lot of progress on that. I don't know if you've ridden the subway in the past week or so, but it's remarkable how it's changed. And I think that is happening. So those are 3 things that have to happen. By the way, all of these things have to happen and they have to reinforce each other. The fourth one, which I think is absolutely critical as well, is the development by scientists and people in the health sciences area of developing therapeutics and treatments. Because one of the scary things about this disease has been that there are no treatments. If you contracted this disease, your outcome, whether you had a slight outcome, whether you had a serious case, whether, God forbid, you had to go to the hospital and be put on a respirator or have oxygen, or whether you die, is purely a matter of chance. It's a matter of your own biology and how your body reacts to that virus. There was nothing that medical science could do for you. The doctors told you, if you have the symptoms, if you test it and you have it, stay home and quarantine. Only call us up if you can't breathe or having difficulty breathing, because then we can give you oxygen, put you on a respirator. But all of that was doing, it was keeping you alive to allow your body for the disease to run its course from your body. And that was a very frightening thing. If you caught the disease, there's nothing the doctors can do about it. So the development of treatments, so we have remdesivir, I guess, is one that's now treats a small cohort of people who have this disease. But all over the world, people are working on this, and there's money in it too. So all of the companies are after different treatments. And I'm sure, very confident that, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, we'll have a variety of treatments. So if you have people feeling my likelihood of contracting this is pretty low, which it is already, but it's much, much lower through some of the things I've said. Plus, if I do get the disease, the likelihood that I will be treated and have a relatively mild case, or at least I won't have a life-threatening case, is the likelihood that I won't have a life-threatening case is huge. The likelihood that I will have a severe reaction is very, very small. All of a sudden, the impact, the psychological impact of COVID kind of recedes into the background and mixes with all the other stuff that's out there, all of the risks in life. The fifth thing is the magic bullet, of course, and that's the vaccine. If we were all injected with a vaccine, nobody would get the disease, so we'd all be happy. That may happen. It may happen. I don't know. Maybe they'll get something in this year, but it has to be manufactured. It has to be tested. It has to be manufactured. It has to be distributed, and billions of people have to be injected. It's not happening tomorrow. But I think those other four things are happening within a relatively short period of time. And that's the way we get back to, as I say, the vision of everything sort of, we have a very robust and vibrant economy, and people go to offices and they don't really worry too much about this.
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, I think that's great. I think, you provided a ton of great insight and just a vision for the future. And I'm tremendously optimistic, and I know you are too. And I feel good about the way things are going. And yeah, just, and my advice for everyone at home is just to stay optimistic and just to keep, pushing ahead and keep working hard. Is there anything that you want to add or anything you want to close this out with, Fred? Or
well, it's obviously a very, very challenging time. It's challenging emotionally for everybody. I know a lot of people lost their jobs, and of course people who have been sick and tragically people have lost their lives. It's a life-changing experience. It's going to be with us. This experience is going to be with us for the rest of our lives. And it's going to impact the way we look at things in the future. The positive side is we'll get through this, right? And life will go on. I think, maybe in the future, even if all these things happen and because there'll be other diseases out there. So yes, maybe we'll all be more conscious of washing our hands. Yes, we'll all be more conscious of sneezing and covering our faces when we sneeze and so forth. And observing other new protocols for how we live our lives. But in general, we'll go to movies and theaters. Well, I don't know about movies with all the stuff on TV now, but we'll go to theaters and concerts and bars and restaurants, and there'll be a lively culture. And particularly in New York, it's just a wonderful place, and it will survive, and it's very, very resilient. So be optimistic.
Right. I agree with you 100%. So, yeah, I want to thank you so much for joining us today and really providing just a ton of insight on and where we're at and where we're going in, the office space and retail and commercial real estate. It's been very, very useful. I'm sure everyone's going to love it. So thank you again. And my name is John McSherry from Douglas Elliman, and I want to thank REDinNYC for making this opportunity available for us. And we'll talk to you guys soon. Thank you, Fred.